It's like, he gives us an analogy. You know, the best teachers use analogies. The best teachers use analogies. He says, كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ. And who's the best teacher? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then his prophets. He says, كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ. It's like a heavy rain. أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ. That makes the farmer pleased because of the vegetation that the heavy rain brings. So that's what these things are like. But then what happens to that vegetation? كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ ثُمَّ يَهِيجُ فَتَرَاهُ مُصْفَرًّا ثُمَّ يَكُونُ حُطَامًا. But then that vegetation, you all know what happens to it, right? Like, I could get you the most beautiful bouquet of roses. I love roses. Roses are awesome. But roses are only beautiful for like 2 seconds, right? What happens to a rose after a week, after 2 weeks? What happens? First, it starts to wilt, starts to become dry, it becomes a yellow, and then it becomes just something that becomes like debris. I can take that rose that used to be so perfect, and I can crumble it in my hand, and I can go outside in the wind, and it's gone. It's nothing. Why does Allah use this analogy? Because He's telling us something. He's teaching us something. He's saying that these things, they please you for a moment, right? The rattle, the video games, the play, the amusement, the brand name clothes, the scores on your MCATs, you know, the house, the kids, the wealth, all this stuff, it makes you happy for a while. It's like playing Monopoly, right? How many people play Monopoly? Ever heard of Monopoly? All right. I didn't mean that you play Monopoly like now, but you played it at some point. Okay. When you're playing it and you're getting rich, right? Because you're getting a lot of Monopoly money, and then you're like owning stuff, and then every time someone visits your stuff, then they have to pay you. So when you're playing Monopoly, you're really happy and pleased for like 15 minutes. Because why? Because you're rich. You have all this cool ownership. You own stuff. You own land. You own property. You own money. But can you actually buy anything with that money? If I take all my millions of dollars, I don't even know how much you make in Monopoly. But like, you're a millionaire, right? For like 2 seconds, you're a millionaire. Now take that money and try to buy a house with it. What's going to happen? Well, they're going to think you're crazy. But the reason you can't buy a house with Monopoly money is it has no intrinsic value. It has actually no value. Even though it's like you feel rich, like you have something, right? But in reality, capital R, in the real world, it has no value. And that's exactly what all of these things are like. The play and the amusement and the boasting and the brands and the, you know, all the things that you run after, they're just like that Monopoly money, because although it feels good for a moment, just like the farmer, right? Who has this vegetation and it's awesome and it makes him happy. A'jab al-kuffar, like he's pleased with it. But then eventually the reality is that it has no actual value and it passes away. It crumbles, it becomes dry, and then it becomes yellow, and then it's just debris. ثُمَّ يَكُونُ حُطَامًا. Allah is teaching us a very important lesson. Now, is that lesson that I can't play with the rattle? That I can't play the video game? That I can't care about adornment? Or want to be adorned? That I can't, do these things, go to school? No, that's not what Allah is telling us. But He's explaining to us the intrinsic value of these things. That these are things that come and go. That these are fleeting things, just like that vegetation. That vegetation is there. It makes him happy, it makes the farmer happy, but then it passes away. Now, what happens after it passes away? There's one of two outcomes. After these other things pass away, and they will pass away. And one thing to keep in mind is this. If you ever get really, really caught up with something in your life, like currently, whether it's your job, or it's your studies, or it's a person in your life, or it's a conflict, or a problem, just do this mental exercise. Think back 10 years ago. Think back 20 years ago. Think back 25 years ago, 30 years ago, if you depending on how old you are. And ask yourself, what were you caught up with then? And does it still matter now? Do you understand what I'm saying? Think 30 years ago, maybe you were 5. Maybe you were 2. Maybe you were 25. Think of what was keeping you up at night at that point, and ask yourself, is that still a concern today? Chances are, I hope, that whatever you were concerned with when you were 5 is not the same as you are now, yeah? What does that teach you? That teaches you that these things which, yes, in the moment it feels like it's everything, right? In the moment it feels like it's the most important thing. But eventually it passes away and it changes. And then now, those things that were so important now don't mean anything to you. What happens at the end, after all this passes away, is one of 2 outcomes. Either there's, Allah says, the punishment of Allah, or His mercy and His forgiveness and His good pleasure. Those are the things that are going to be lasting after these other fleeting pleasures pass away. وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. What is the life of this world but chattel of deception? How do we strike this balance? Because people are going to talk about, well, you know, what is she saying, you know? Like, I know you're going to say that. How do we, you know, she's saying that we can't have nice pastries, right? Well, okay. That's not what I'm saying, and that's not what we're taught. What we are taught is to understand the intrinsic value of these things. It's not haram to play Monopoly, folks. It's not haram. There's nothing wrong with playing Monopoly. But if you think that money is real, that's when you have a problem. That's your problem. And that's really the issue. Yes, okay, have your pastries, and have your degrees, and have your money, and have your pleasure. But if you think that that's what's real, capital R, then that's your problem. When you take those things and you make those things what has the most value, when you take those things and you think those are the things of value, and then you ignore the true things of value, that's when you have a problem.